Her alien culture demands a first night, and the human was her prize. The twin suns of Kazara Prime shone brightly over the grand arena. Thousands of alien nobles filled the glowing crystal seats, their long robes shining in the light. It was the day of binding, the most sacred event in Kazaran culture. On this day, royal daughters would choose their mates in front of the entire planet. Not for love, not for friendship, but for tradition, status, and bloodline. At the center of the arena stood Princess Zirell, tall and graceful, with shimmering violet skin and silver eyes that never blinked. She wore the ceremonial dress of her ancestors, thin silk wrapped around her glowing body, with golden threads dancing in the wind. She looked calm, cold, and powerful, just like everyone expected from a future queen. But behind that still face, Zirell's heart was not calm. She had trained her whole life for this moment. She had studied the names of all eligible males, learned their ranks, and memorized their victories. She was told to pick one of them, to bind with him, to sleep with him on the first night, and seal her position as heir. But Zirell had other thoughts, thoughts she could never share, not until today. At the edge of the arena, standing awkwardly near the royal guards, was a human, Jack Marlowe, Earth's ambassador, dressed in a dark gray suit that looked completely out of place among the bright alien robes. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't part of the ritual. He had come to observe, to learn, maybe to sign a peace agreement. He never imagined what would happen next. The high priest stepped forward, his voice echoing across the arena. "Princess Zirell, daughter of the high bloodline, it is time," he said. "Choose your bond, and let the stars witness your first claim." A long silence followed. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for Zirell to walk toward one of the noble males. Some warriors puffed out their chests. Others smiled with pride. Zirell turned slowly, her eyes scanning them one by one. Then she walked past them. Gasps spread through the arena. Confused murmurs filled the air. Zirell kept walking, ignoring the stares, ignoring her own mother's shocked expression. She stopped in front of Jack, the human. He looked around, thinking maybe she had made a mistake. Zirell raised her hand and placed 2 fingers on Jack's chest, the sacred gesture of choice. The arena went silent, completely frozen, then chaos. "No!" someone shouted. "She cannot choose an off-worlder," screamed a noble. "The ceremony forbids it," growled one of the priests. But the gesture was made, and by Kazaran law, it could not be undone. Jack looked at Zirell in disbelief. "What are you doing?" he whispered. Her voice was soft but firm. "Saving myself," she said. "And maybe you too." He didn't understand, not yet. Guards rushed toward him, but not to arrest. They gently took him by the arms. "He must be prepared," said the high priest with a shaking voice. "The first night begins at dusk." "No," Jack said, pulling back. "I didn't agree to this." "You don't have a choice now," whispered a royal advisor beside him. "If you refuse, it means insult. Insult means war." The crowd roared with voices of anger and confusion. News spread across the city in seconds. The princess had chosen a human. Some called it betrayal, others called it bravery. But for Jack, it felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He was taken to a private chamber inside the royal palace. Alien servants washed his body, oiled his skin, and placed strange glowing symbols on his chest. They dressed him in a long robe made of soft threads that floated like mist. No one would talk to him. No one would answer his questions. Outside his window, the twin suns began to fall. The first night was coming, and Jack Marlowe, a man from Earth, was now the chosen prize in an alien ritual he never wanted. He didn't know what would happen in that chamber. He didn't know what Zirell truly wanted. But one thing was clear: this was not a celebration. This was a trap wrapped in silk, and the door was about to close. The door closed behind Jack with a soft hiss, sealing him inside a room that shimmered with warm golden light. The walls seemed alive, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. It didn't feel like a prison, but it also didn't feel safe. Jack stood still, Wrapped in the strange robe the servants had placed on him, the fabric clung to his skin, light as air yet oddly warm. He kept trying to make sense of what was happening, but nothing made sense anymore. He had come to Kazara Prime to speak on behalf of Earth, to build bridges, not to be chosen like a trophy by an alien princess. He didn't even know Zirell personally. They had only spoken once, briefly, during a diplomatic dinner. She had asked him what humans thought about tradition, and he had replied with a shrug. "It depends," he had said. "Sometimes we follow it, sometimes we break it." At the time, it felt like small talk, but now he wondered if that one answer had sealed his fate. The room smelled of something sweet, something strange. A scent that made his thoughts slow down. He walked toward the bed in the center, wide and smooth, covered in fabric that glowed like starlight. It was beautiful and terrifying. He didn't want to sit on it. He didn't want to be here at all. A soft chime rang. The door opened again. Zirell entered. She moved like water, smooth and graceful. Her dress thinner now, almost transparent. Her silver eyes locked on his, unreadable. She wasn't smiling. But she wasn't angry either. Just calm. Jack took a step back. "Zirell," he said quietly, "I don't want to offend you, but I don't understand why I'm here." She tilted her head, then closed the door behind her without speaking. "You're here because I chose you," she said, "and by our law, you cannot refuse." "I didn't come here for this," he said. "I'm not part of your ritual. I'm not even from your world." "Exactly," she said, walking slowly toward him. "You are not from my world, which means you are not part of the chains that bind it." Jack's breath caught. Her words were soft but heavy, filled with something deeper. "You don't want this, do you?" he asked. "This ceremony, this first night." Zirell stopped. Standing only a few steps away, her voice dropped to a whisper. "My whole life has been a plan, a path written before I was born," she said. "The first night is not about love or even choice. It's about control, about reminding us who we belong to." Jack stared at her, realizing she wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about every woman in her society, every royal daughter forced to smile while giving up her freedom. "So why choose me?" he asked. "Why risk everything?" Zirell looked away for a moment, then back at him, her silver eyes no longer cold. "Because you looked at me like I was a person," she said, "not a prize." A long silence followed. Jack sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. "They'll punish you," he said, "for choosing me." "Yes," she answered. "And they'll punish you too if we don't complete the ritual." Jack frowned. "What happens if we don't?" Zirell walked to a small table and poured 2 cups of glowing blue liquid. She handed him one. "If we don't fulfill the night, the bond is considered broken," she said. "And a broken bond is a crime punishable by exile or death." Jack stared at the drink in his hand, his throat dry. "But if we do complete it?" he asked. "What then?" Zirell sat beside him, close but not touching. "Then they believe we are bound by destiny," she said, "and I remain next in line to the throne." He looked at her carefully. "What do you want, Zirell? Not your council, not your ancestors, not your tradition. What do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment, then she whispered, "I want one night where I'm free to choose." Jack set the cup down, his hands trembling slightly. "Then let's do something crazy," he said. "Let's talk." Zirell blinked, confused. "Talk?" "Yes," he said. "Let's talk until the suns rise. And if anyone asks what happened, we say we shared the night our own way." She stared at him, then smiled just a little, for the first time that day. So they talked, hour after hour, about stars, about Earth, about freedom, about pain. She told him about the cages hidden behind her palace walls. He told her about wars humans fought to break free from old chains. No one touched, no one kissed, but something powerful passed between them, understanding, respect, the beginning of something real. When the suns began to rise, they were still sitting side by side, awake, but changed, and outside the chamber, whispers already started. because no one had heard a single sound all night, not a cry, not a moan, not a single scream of victory, only silence, and for the high priest, that silence was more dangerous than any rebellion. The silence of the first night chamber did not go unnoticed. In a palace where traditions were older than stone, silence was dangerous. Silence meant rebellion. By sunrise, the golden halls of the royal palace were filled with whispers. Priests glanced at one another in fear. Advisors gathered in tight circles, voices low and urgent. None of them could accept it. Not a single sound had come from Princess Zirell's chamber. No ritual cries, no confirmation of the bond. Only stillness. At the temple gates, the high priest clenched his trembling fingers around the ceremonial staff. His face pale, his voice thin as he sent servants to confirm what he already suspected. Inside the chamber, Zirell sat beside Jack on the edge of the wide bed, their backs touching lightly. Neither of them had slept. Both had spent the night in conversation, laughter, and quiet honesty. It was unlike anything either of them had experienced before. Zirell reached over and gently touched Jack's arm, her fingers brushing against the strange texture of his earth-made robe. She smiled faintly, tired but peaceful. "You stayed," she said softly. "You asked me to," he replied, looking at her. "I think that matters, but the peace they shared was short-lived." A loud knock rattled the chamber door, and without waiting, it opened. Several temple guards entered, their faces stern, their weapons lowered but ready behind them. The high priest stepped in, his golden robes dragging against the polished floor. He looked at them, at the bed, at their robes still perfectly in place, at their relaxed faces, and his lips tightened with anger. "You have insulted the sacred rite," he said sharply. The union was not completed. Jack stood up slowly, his hands open. "We didn't dishonor anyone," he said. "We spent the night in peace, in respect." The high priest narrowed his eyes. "There is no respect in defiance." Zirell rose beside him, calm but firm. "The law says the bond must be made, but it does not say how. You mock centuries of tradition with wordplay," the priest snapped. "You were chosen to give yourself to him, not share bedtime stories." Zirell didn't blink. "Then rewrite the tradition." The guards tensed, waiting for an order, waiting to act. But the priest held up his hand. He stepped closer to Jack, his voice low now, almost a whisper. "Do you know what you've done, human?" he said. "You have caused chaos without drawing a blade." Jack looked into his eyes and replied, "Then maybe your order wasn't as strong as you believed." That was enough. The high priest turned to the guards. "Take them," he said coldly. "Both of them. They are to stand trial for breaking the sacred bond." Zirell raised her hand. "I am royal blood. I demand the right of speaker." But the priest didn't answer. The guards stepped forward, gripping her arms. Jack tried to stop them, but 3 others seized him at once. They dragged him out of the chamber, through the long corridors of the palace. As they were pulled apart, Zirell's eyes met Jack's, and for the first time, there was fear in them, not for herself, but for him, outside. The streets of the capital city buzzed with rumors. Some believed the human had forced her to break the ritual. Others whispered that Zirell had chosen to shame the priesthood, but many, especially the young, shared secret smiles. They spoke in low tones about what it meant to spend a night talking instead of claiming, choosing instead of obeying. In the council hall, Zirell was locked inside a glowing chamber of energy. Jack was thrown into a holding cell made of crystal and steel. He sat alone, his mind spinning, wondering if he had made a mistake by not following the tradition. But deep down, he knew something had shifted, something bigger than one night. As the planet's moons crossed in the sky, the Grand Council summoned a private meeting. The high priest stood at the center and demanded punishment, demanded that the sacred order be restored. But one of the younger counselors, a woman with glowing teal skin, spoke up quietly. "Why are we so afraid?" she said. "Did they cause violence? Did they break the law? Or did they simply choose?" The room went silent, because deep down, they all knew the truth. The first night had always been about power, not love, not destiny, and certainly not choice. And now one human and one royal girl had exposed that lie. The trial was set. For the next day, and across the stars, people tuned in, not just from Kazara, but from allied worlds. Even from Earth, two people had done nothing. And yet, they had started something. Something that couldn't be stopped with silence anymore. The skies above Kazara were a pale green that morning, thick with clouds that hadn't moved in days, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. In the royal city below, nothing felt normal. The streets were too quiet, the markets too tense. Something had cracked in the heart of tradition, and everyone could feel it. Inside the council chambers, guards stood like statues along the curved walls. Zirell sat straight back in the center, not in royal robes now, but in a plain tunic. Her head held high, her eyes cold and clear. She didn't speak, not yet. Not until they gave her the right. Jack stood nearby, chained by glowing cuffs. Even now, even here, he didn't regret the night before. Across from them, the high priest. Read out ancient laws with fire in his voice, calling their actions disgraceful, calling their silence betrayal. But something was different today. The crowd listening beyond the chamber walls wasn't reacting the way the council expected. People didn't cheer at the priest's words. They didn't nod with approval. They simply listened, eyes narrowed. Minds working. Zirell finally stood, her voice steady. For thousands of years, she said, we have followed rituals we never questioned. A few counselors looked uneasy, others stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear what she was really saying. We call it sacred, but we never asked if it was right, she continued. The first night is supposed to be a bond, but it begins with no choice, no voice, just submission. The high priest slammed his staff on the floor. This is heresy, he shouted. She is poisoned by this human's influence. Jack stepped forward, despite the chains, his voice calm. She didn't need me to change, he said. She was already thinking. Your fear is that she finally said it out loud. Outside the council walls, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Not marching soldiers, but citizens, hundreds of them, maybe thousands gathering. They weren't shouting. They weren't breaking anything. They were just standing, watching, waiting. The high priest saw it through the crystal screens and paled. He turned to the guards. Separate them, he ordered. Now, before this spreads further. The guards stepped forward, but hesitated. One guard looked at Zirell, his grip on his weapon loosening. Do you believe she's wrong? Jack asked, his voice loud now. Or are you just afraid she might be right? That one sentence, quiet but sharp, hung in the air like a blade. Some of the council members shifted in their seats. No one answered. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice rose, young, uncertain, but brave. She's not wrong, it said. It was the daughter of Counselor Rian, barely of age, but old enough to understand the weight of silence. Others followed, voices rising from the side halls, from balconies, even from behind the glass. Zirell took a breath, her voice no longer calm, but burning. I do not reject my culture, she said. I reject the chains disguised as honor. The high priest shouted for silence, but it was too late. The chamber was full of murmurs, rising louder in a corner of the palace, hidden from sight. An old maid whispered to another. I served 5 princesses before her. None ever dared speak. Like this, outside, the crowd began to chant, not angrily, not violently, just a single word, repeated over and over. Choice! It echoed like thunder, low and slow, shaking the foundation of the palace walls. Inside, the priest's face turned red with rage. This is treason, he said. She will be removed from the line of blood. Zirell didn't flinch. Jack looked at her, and for a moment, there was no palace, no priest, no chains. Just 2 people who had chosen silence over obedience. And suddenly, the chains around his wrists clicked open. Not from the priest's order, not from command, but by the will of one of the guards who quietly stepped back, placing the key on the ground. Something had changed, something that couldn't be put back. Zirell turned to the crowd, raising her hand not to silence them, but to join them, and they raised their hands back, a sea of glowing palms. The first night was no longer about tradition. It was now the beginning of a storm. They ran through the shadowed tunnels beneath the palace, their feet slapping against cold stone, their breaths sharp in the dark. No royal guards behind them, yet, but it was only a matter of time. Every moment they stayed inside Kezara. Walls was borrowed, fragile, fading like the glow of the twin moons above. Zirell led the way, her fingers gripping Jack's hand tightly. She moved like someone who had memorized every escape path years ago, but never had a reason to use them until now. Behind them, the city murmured with unrest. The council hadn't announced her exile yet, but everyone already knew. The people weren't angry, they were waiting, watching, unsure if they were witnessing a fall or the beginning of something powerful. Jack's muscles ached. The robe they had forced on him was now torn, dirt on his face, bruises on his arms. He didn't care, not now, not when Zirell was beside him and fire was rising across the empire. They reached an old metal door hidden behind thick vines and rust. Zirell pressed a glowing stone into the center, and the door groaned open. Beyond it was not freedom, but deeper danger. Outside the palace, the city looked different at night, less royal, more real. The streets no longer golden and clean, but cracked and alive. Lights flickered overhead as the wind carried whispers of rebellion. They slipped through alleys, past sleeping vendors, past ancient stone statues of forgotten queens. At the edge of the city, they reached an old transport garage built into the side of a hill. A dark figure waited for them there, a short, wrinkled woman in a faded scarf, her eyes sharp as ever. "You came," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." Zirell nodded. "You were the only one who told me to question the old ways." The woman looked at Jack and gave a slow nod. "The human," she said. "He must be special." Zirell didn't reply, but she held Jack's hand tighter. The old woman led them inside, past broken machines and dusty storage crates, until they reached a hidden door in the floor. "Down there is a safe path," she said. "Takes you to the outer wastelands, where the council's reach doesn't stretch. Others are waiting for you," she added. "They've been waiting for a voice, now they have too." They climbed down into the dark, the smell of rust and earth filling their lungs. And behind them, the woman closed the hatch, sealing them off from everything they once knew. The tunnel was long and cold, lit by glowing blue moss that clung to the walls. Jack could hear running water somewhere in the distance. For a moment, they said nothing, just walked side by side, their shoulders brushing. "You knew she would help us?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. "She was my first tutor," Zirell replied. "Fired for teaching me ideas that didn't come from holy books." "She's braver than the entire council," Jack said. Zirell smiled faintly, but her eyes were distant. "I never thought I'd run from my own home," she whispered. "I was raised to be a queen." Jack stopped, turned toward her, and said, "Maybe you're becoming one now." They reached the end of the tunnel, and a warm breeze touched their skin. They stepped out into open night, the sky vast and dark, stars stretched like silver dust. In the distance, a campfire burned. Small shapes moved around it, figures wrapped in rough cloth, eyes glowing softly in the dark. Rebels, exiles, thinkers, dreamers, the ones who didn't fit the old mold. When Zirell and Jack approached, no one spoke at first. Then a young alien girl stepped forward, no older than 15 by Earth standards. "You're her," she said, eyes wide. "The princess who didn't." "Bo," Zirell said nothing, unsure how to respond. "You gave us a reason to stay alive." The girl added, "We thought no one inside the palace cared." A heavy silence followed, then someone clapped once. Slow and strong, another followed, and soon the camp echoed with quiet applause. Not wild or loud, but full of meaning. Jack looked at Zirell, and for the first time since this started, he saw tears in her eyes, not of fear, but of relief. They sat with the others that night around the fire, shared food, stories, warmth. The stars above didn't feel so far anymore. But deep in the capital, the high priest stood before a burning map of Khazara's territories, his eyes glowing with fury. "She won't destroy what we built," he whispered. Not with words, not with dreams. He turned to his guards, his voice sharp and final. "Find them," he ordered, "before the people forget how to be afraid." The wind over the wastelands howled like a wounded beast, carrying the scent of metal and ash. The old desert city of Vorax was half buried in sand, forgotten by the Empire, but tonight it was awake. Firelight flickered behind broken stone walls, voices whispered in corners. And in the heart of it all stood Jack and Zirell, surrounded by those who had no names in the history books, but had everything to lose. A message had come at dusk, smuggled through hands loyal to neither the crown nor the priesthood. A trial had been ordered not in secret, but public, wide-streamed across planets. The council thought they could crush the spark by showing the world her fall. Zirell read the message aloud to the rebels gathered around her. Her voice didn't shake, but Jack could feel her heart beating faster. He stood beside her, not as a guest of Khazara anymore, but as someone tied to its fate. "If we go back," he said, "they might not let us leave alive." "If we don't go," she replied, "they will say we ran because we were wrong." She looked around at the rebels, young and old, scarred and silent. "This isn't just about me anymore," she said. "It's about all of you, all of us." At dawn, they climbed into an old transport ship, patched with alien steel and earth parts. The pilot was a woman with a metal eye and no patience. She took them without questions, the kind of ally Zirell had never been allowed to meet before. As the city disappeared behind them, the skies over the capital came into view again, bright towers rising from green oceans, the heart of everything they had left behind. When they landed, no guards waited with cuffs. Instead, they were escorted by silent watchers in silver armor, not cruel, not kind, just empty. The great hall was packed. Even the outer balconies were filled with citizens and off-worlders who had flown in to witness it. Screens hovered in the air, streaming every breath to millions. Zirell wore a plain robe, no royal colors, no crown. She had left that behind in the dust. Jack stood beside her again, not because he was told to, but because he chose to. At the center of the hall stood the Tribunal 7 council elders, including the high priest, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burning with something ancient and angry. "You return in defiance," the priest said. "You speak again." Without permission, Zirell looked at him, calm and clear. "I return because truth does not need permission." A ripple moved through the crowd, like wind in tall grass. "You violated the rite of binding," the priest said. "You rejected your sacred duty, and now you bring a foreign voice to poison our youth." Jack stepped forward. "Your traditions demand silence," he said. "Ours were built on questioning, on learning, on rising when things don't make sense anymore." "You don't understand our world," the priest growled. "I don't have to," Jack replied. "Because she does, and she chose to stand." Zirell spoke again, louder now, her voice not shaking, not hiding. "I was raised to kneel on the first night," she said, "but I rose instead. I chose to speak to the man across from me, not surrender to him." Gasps echoed across the chamber. The council shifted uncomfortably. "I was told that strength means obedience," she continued. "But I say strength is knowing when to break what's broken." Some citizens clapped. Others looked stunned. The high priest banged his staff. "This is not a performance," he shouted. "No," said Zirell. "This is a reckoning." A young woman from the upper balcony suddenly stood and called out. "I was forced to bind at 14, she said. "They told me it was sacred." Another voice followed. "My sister died during the ritual, and they made us thank the gods for her sacrifice." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in voices, real voices, not whispers, no longer afraid. Zirell stepped back, letting the truth carry itself. Jack reached for her hand and held it. The council had the law, the history, the ceremony, but Zirell had the people. The trial couldn't continue, not in the way the priest wanted. He turned to the others, but they would not meet his eyes. The High Council stood still as the hall trembled, not from weapons, but from truth. That night, no sentence was given, no punishment announced, but across Khazara, the rite of binding was suspended. Old laws paused for the first time in 1,000 years, and the stars above didn't blink. They watched silently as two voices, one human, one alien, cut through the darkness, not with swords, not with rebellion, but with choice. The sky above the palace glowed with quiet light, as if the stars themselves had leaned in to listen. Inside the walls, where only silence had ruled for centuries, now came the sound of footsteps, not soldiers, not priests, but people, citizens, students, mothers, daughters, even elders who had once guarded tradition with iron hands. They gathered not to fight, but to watch what came next. Zirell stood at the edge of the balcony overlooking them all. No guards at her side, no crown on her head. The wind caught her hair, silver threads dancing against her bare shoulders. Behind her stood Jack, dressed not in ceremonial robes, but in simple traveler's cloth. He wasn't a king, he wasn't a savior. He was just a man who had listened when no one else did. Days had passed since the trial, and yet the council had not moved against her, not because they had accepted defeat, but because the world around them had changed too quickly. One law had been removed. The first night paused, not erased, but placed under review. For the first time in the Empire's history, tradition had been forced to explain itself. Zirell looked down at the crowd and spoke without amplification. Yet every word carried. "You asked what comes next," she said. "The truth is, I don't know." A soft rustle moved through the crowd like a wind through tall grass. "I was born in a palace, taught to obey, trained to perform," she continued. "But the first real choice I ever made was not to follow what others expected." She turned to Jack, eyes soft but strong. "And the second choice I made," she said, "was to trust someone who was never meant to stand beside me." Jack stepped forward, standing at her side. "When I came to this world," he said, "I thought I was just here to observe, to learn your ways, sign your documents, then go home." He looked out at the many faces, alien and human alike, but instead, I found something unexpected: courage, buried inside a system built to crush it. The two of them stood together, and for a moment, the crowd said nothing, just stared at them, unsure if this was the end or the beginning. Then from somewhere near the front, a small girl with glowing purple eyes stepped forward. She held a flower in her hand, pale blue and trembling. She looked at Zirell and said, "Do I get to choose when I grow up?" Zirell knelt down, her voice trembling as she answered, "Yes." The child placed the flower in her hand, and the crowd responded not with a roar, but with something stronger. A slow wave of hands raised into the air, open palms facing forward, a sign of peace, a sign of change. In the following weeks, more laws were reviewed. Voices once hidden now joined open discussions. Temples were not burned, councils were not torn down, but they were rebuilt with people who listened, not only commanded. Zirell never took the throne, not the way they expected. She turned it into a council seat, and offered Jack a voice beside her, not as a ruler, but as a trusted equal. Their bond was never sealed with fire, not even with ceremony, but with quiet moments, shared glances, long walks under the moons, laughter inside forgotten rooms. He never claimed her, and she never submitted to him. They simply chose each other, again and again, every single day. In the ancient histories of Khazara, there is now a new chapter, not of bloodlines and thrones, but of a first night that never was, and a quiet rebellion that changed a galaxy. And if you ask the elders what truly happened that night, they will say, she reached for freedom, and the human held her hand, not to lead her, not to pull her back, but to walk beside her where she belonged.